This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, show 100.
Woo!
I feel like we need some fireworks.
Welcome to We the SEs Podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Majaba.
How do we start an intro?
So we already did this is just like with words, like
with words?
Whatever you want.
Hello, SE Nation. Welcome back to another episode. That's how we start the show. I couldn't figure out how to do this. And alongside me, or in front of me, and virtually, is Benny Kanungo, my co-host extraordinaire, the best co-host I've ever had, my favorite co-host of this show.
I'm not going to worry about default responses or anything. All those I'm going to take at face value. And so thank you, Ramsey.
You're welcome. So we have an amazing show. 3 amazing folks are jumping on the show. You know them. If you've been following me on LinkedIn, you know who they are. And I'm going to repeat them right now. Chris White, John Care, Greg Holmes. And we're going to talk about sales engineering.
Yeah, I think this particular show too is so cool. I mean, again, I've only had the opportunity to be here for a little bit, and this one brought so many cool ideas together, so many cool perspectives together. And no matter where you're coming from in the sales engineering world, whether you're just starting, whether you've been in it for decades, or even if you're outside of sales engineering and you have some cursory interest in it, honestly, if there was ever a podcast show to listen to, I would say this is the one to get an all-encompassing view as to what it's all about, where it's going, where it came from, and some best practices within it.
And food for thought, it's not the account rep who owns the account or the opportunity. It is the sales team. And listen to the show, you'll know more where that came from. See you on the show. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Ramsey.
Hey
Ramsey.
So we have Chris, who just said hi, and Greg, who followed him with hi, and John, who's waiting for me to say his name before he says hi. So we don't all talk over each other. So this is a bit of an experiment. We also have Benny on the show to help me out and help me moderate this. So thank you guys for being here. Thank you for making the 100th episode a special one. I really appreciate you spending the time with me. Doesn't matter what time it is during the day or night in some cases. So thank you guys for being here.
Congratulations on 100. Yeah. That's awesome.
That's fabulous.
Thank you. So, all right. We know pretty much your stories because you've been on the show before. John, you've been on episode 17. Greg, you've been on episode 31. And Chris, you've been on episode 95 and 99, which is not out yet, and 100. So 3 in a row. But maybe we can have a brief intro from from maybe starting with John, like who you are and what you do. And if people want more details, they can go back and watch the previous episode.
Sure. So hello, everyone. My name is John Care. Number 17, apparently. I am the author and managing director of a company called Mastering Technical Sales. My company is now, I can truly say, a global company, and we focus on servicing the professional skills of sales engineers. So that's classic training around discovery, demos, presentations. We also do management, pre-sales leaders, and also things like keynote addresses. So that's my company in a nutshell. And we solely focus on the world of pre-sales engineering and nothing else, which is truly awesome.
Well, welcome to the show again. And now we'll move on to Greg.
Hey, so last time I was on, I was in a different role, but I've moved on now. I'm at Apptio, so transforming the IT operating model, which is what we do. But I've been a sales engineer for 20 years. I got started with reading one of these books, so thank you.
Wow.
But like Ramsey, I got interested in advancing my own skills through blogging and everything myself. So I wrote a blog called salesengineerguy.com. And yeah, I was really glad to be on his show the first time, and I'd love to, impart some of my wisdom, if I have any, on this one.
Well, welcome to the show again. And for those who are not watching the YouTube video, just listening, Greg pulled out Mastering Technical Sales, the book written by John Care, sitting in my... There you go. Yeah. No, people go watch the YouTube channel. And last but not least, we have Chris White. Chris, you've introduced yourself twice so far. How about we do it a third time?
Why not? So clearly I need to ship Greg a book. So yes, Chris White. I'm also an author. In fact, John Care has sort of been, an idol of mine for many years, and I aspire to sort of be where he is in probably 15 years. I'm probably about where he was about 15 years ago. But yeah, I published a book for sales engineers last year, and called The 6 Habits of Highly Effective Sales Engineers. I know many of your listeners heard that probably a week or two ago. I have also now started a coaching, consulting, and training business called Demo Doctor. And similar to John's business, we do one thing and one thing only, and that's all around pre-sales engineers, technical sales, whether that's training, working with practitioners, leadership, etc. So, and Ramsey, I told you this before, but I just love what you've been doing. The fact that you've hit 100 podcasts is really a huge milestone, and I'm just thrilled to have the opportunity to be part of it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I couldn't have done it without you guys and without everybody listening who's been encouraging me to go through this. And Benny has been an amazing support system Benny's shaking his head, but he has been invaluable to me the last few weeks. So
he's a great sidekick, man. I'm telling you.
Well, yeah, it's amazing when I don't have any questions. He just comes in, fills in the void. So it's a good tandem. So, all right, we're talking about sales engineering, and I noticed that whenever I talk to people about sales engineering, people either don't know what it is or have a different definition of what sales engineering is. So I'd love to know if someone comes to you and asks you what is a sales engineer, how do you explain what it is we do?
And we'll start off with same order as before. So let's start off with John, and Greg, and then Chris.
Wow. So this is what I call the cocktail party problem, right? Where someone says, what do you do? You say a sales engineer, one sentence into it, and they immediately say, oh, I have to go freshen up my gin and tonic, and off they go. So it's a little struggle. So the way I kind of describe it, I give an example. I say, think about you work for a big company like, I am Oracle, Intel, and there's some glad-handing sales rep who makes a call on the IT department and buys them whatever, wine and sushi, and is trying to sell them stuff. At some point, somebody else has to come and actually explain what that technical stuff is, how it works, how it integrates into the environment, and how it's going to save them money or make them money. Really is the role of the sales engineer. In fact, it's kind of the technical conscience of the sales force is probably my one sentence description of it.
The technical conscience of the sales role. I've never heard that before. I am going to steal it from now on. If you
Please do.
Right. I'll give you credit for it. John Care once told me to say that. This is what we say. All right. Maybe Greg, you can help us out.
Sure thing. I feel like there's a lot of different kinds of pre-sales people. So there's ranges. So I'd like to describe it just thinking of those ranges. So there's technical versus business focus, depending on the level of value that you're offering back. So people who sell to C-level versus practice level, generalists, and I think you were talking about this on a recent podcast, versus specialists. How deep is your knowledge versus how wide is it? But ultimately, it's a trusted advisor in the sales process. So you're still trying to sell something, so you don't, get away with, just saying whatever you like. But at the end of the day, you're helping the sales process. So you're ensuring the technical side is covered.
Okay. All right. So basically, you can't say, "Oh, this product is crap, don't buy it." You still have to try to figure out a way to sell it in a way that will help the customer,
or find a better product to sell.
Or that. There's another option.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, I get consensus from that one. All right. Chris, what do you think a sales engineer is?
So, again, it's going to depend on who I'm talking to, right, in the context. I love what John said, and I wrote about this in the book. Literally, I was at a cocktail party when I first got into this role, and somebody asked me what I did, and I spent 10 minutes explaining enterprise architecture. And then I said something to the effect of, I'm actually the guy that gives a demo. And he said, oh, you're in software sales. And I said, yeah, I guess I'm in software sales. So whenever somebody asks me at a cocktail party, what do I do? The first thing I say is I'm in software sales, because everybody gets that. The other thought that I had, it wasn't until Greg spoke, but I think what's interesting about our role, I don't know if there's any other profession called so many different things in so many different organizations. And there's sales engineer, there's solution architect, there's technical pre-sales. But Greg mentioned this. It's also going broader now. I've heard outcome engineer. I've heard value engineer, right? And that indicates sort of different levels of kind of specificity and business. So I just think it's very interesting. Now, what do I say if somebody says, well, what's a sales engineer? My response is, have you ever attended a sales presentation and maybe demonstration of a software vendor? And maybe there was an individual who first presented some slides, maybe a little background of the story, and then somebody else came and actually gave a demonstration of the product and or gave a technical demonstration. Yeah. That person was the sales engineer. And most people get it right then.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that makes, I like that quite a bit, actually. Yeah, I've definitely run into the same issue as well, where especially a lot of my friends, I don't know, were relatively new out of school a few years ago or whatever it may be. And nobody's ever heard of a sales engineer before. God knows, I certainly didn't. And so trying to explain that initially, without having to explain every little thing you do was difficult. And so that general summarization is quite great. Although I do have a quick question, because I mean, while having the opportunity to be in my role and being able to, read different literature, being able to speak to different people on the show, there are some consistent themes as to what sales engineering is all about, as it can be summed up in a few words. How has it, though, changed over time? I mean, John, maybe you've been in the game the longest in this regard, but obviously Chris and Greg, you two have been in here quite a bit as well. Ramsey too, really. How has sales engineering changed as time has gone on, if it has at all?
Shall we go in the same order?
Let's do same order, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. So I think the role has changed tremendously. I mean, there's a study we did a while back, one of our clients, and we asked close to like 2,000 mid to senior level execs what from their vendors pre-sales teams, and the first thing they said is, I want someone who understands my business. The second thing they said was, I want someone who can design innovative solutions with my staff. Then number 3 was someone who can clearly and effectively communicate with me. Number 4 was someone who could do the right thing for me and my company, a Greg's trusted advisor. And number 5 was someone who has deep technical knowledge. So deep technical knowledge is now basically table stakes, and all these other consultative things have been dropped on top. 20 years ago, so back in 2000, in the heart of the dot-com boom, deep technical knowledge was number 1. And when arguably, the first sales engineer was created sometime in the 70s, when I walked into engineering and grabbed the first engineer, looked him in the eye and took him out on site. It was all about technical knowledge. So now all the business aspects, the consultative aspects have been layered on top. It's a far more complex and nuanced job, whereas the role of the sales rep has barely changed at all in the last 20 years. I think that's what makes being an SE so cool and so much fun.
On this topic, like right now, there's a lot of free stuff online. Like no matter which product you go, you can download a free version and try it out. With networking, my area of expertise, there isn't that. There's only I control whatever they see, all of that. Has that changed how SEs have to deal with the different situations? And Greg, if you'd like to take that one.
Yeah, I'd say if let's put this in the category of free trials, right? So there's all sorts of different free trials, and sometimes they're not really free or trials, but they often get advertised that way. So it's often, there is a certain script to how you do a free trial as well, right? So you give people access, you might let them log in, and then they are sort of guided towards asking for help if they need it, or a little chatbot jumps up and asks them, do you need anything? Do you know what you're doing? A lot of these things are really just lead generation devices, right? They're about you finding out who could be the people you want to sell to. So even though you're already doing a trial or, something like a demo yourself, it's just a teaser to the real demo that could come later in the sales process. Could be after you're actually onboarded in their product, you're then, asked if you want a real demo to buy something. But it's about early user, information and evaluation, and giving them a sense of self-service.
So, like, if the product is a little bit hard to use from first clicks, wouldn't that turn some people off and not go through the process? Like, it has to be. Go ahead.
I wouldn't do it with a product that's hard to use, right? And but a lot of engineering goes into that free trial period, right? That's not an unedited kind of thing, right? It ranges from, a lot of programs for your iPhone or your mobile device that you might just download and try for a while. You're still trying it. You haven't paid them any money. So you're not really a customer until you've decided you want to spend money with them. And in that case, sometimes you will still call up. You might get a support person or someone who's there to help you work out what you really want out of the product. And I'd call that person a sales engineer.
That makes sense. That's it's actually really cool to know that, even as technology progresses, that the role of a sales engineer is always going to be necessary, and that there's always going to need to be that person that could be that human conduit between everything technologically speaking that the solution is providing value-wise to the actual business side of things. And sometimes just a video or a chat box won't necessarily do that. You really need a human element, which I know has come up a lot in our discussions with Chris, the whole idea of kind of being human in the role of an SE and, partnering with those you're working with in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I'll build on what both John and Greg said. I mean, John said that, the technical expertise, that's sort of, that's square one, right? I mean, that's just sort of your ticket to play, right? And I think what's happened to the role of sales engineer is really what's happened to the market, right? Companies don't define their brands anymore. Customers do. And customers are way more intelligent than they were. Certainly, I mean, I got into this role in 2005, right? And they didn't, we didn't have demo and, videos on the web, right? We sort of held most of the chips and most of the information, right? So things have completely shifted. More than likely, whoever we're presenting to or speaking to, they've seen some sort of demo snippet on YouTube or on on our website, right? And have some sense of how it works, right? That's not what they need to know, right? What they need to know is how can they leverage it to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish, right? So to your point, Benny, not only do I think sales engineers are we that much more important, it's that much important that we recognize the need to develop our communication skills and our sales skills and our collaboration skills, right? That is the sales engineer of today, right? The technology part is important, right? We have to know our stuff and be experts in our fields, but we have to develop our sales craft.
100%. I agree. It's like something I'm starting to do right now is trying to read more sales books. Well, just like involve that type of learning of things. So, good point.
So if I want to summarize what you just said, Chris, and correct me if I'm wrong. Like maybe in the past, people, SEs were okay to just be the technical resource, those who answer questions, come in and do demos. But as it's progressed so far, SEs have to take a more sales or have to be better prepared for the sales portion of it, or did I misunderstand that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, look, when I first got into the business, and you guys have heard me say this, I mean, I thought I was going to be brilliant because I could move a mouse and talk at the same time, right? I mean, it wasn't good enough 15 years ago to just be a smart technical person, right? We needed sales skills then, and that's why I developed the training I developed 10 years ago and ultimately wrote a book, right? I think what's different is customers are smarter now and they have more access to information than ever before. So we just have to be aware of that. We almost always have to assume going into a demo that they've already seen something, you know, they're not seeing this for the first time, right? We got to work really hard to tell them things that they don't already know, right? Like, don't waste my time with stuff that I can find on the internet, right? I need to understand, how can I apply this in a certain way, right? That's new and different, and is going to give us a competitive advantage. Now you have my attention, and now you may get my business, right? I think that's the difference. Does that make sense, Ramsey?
It does. And I'm thinking for the future also. John, I know you wrote an article about the sales engineer in 2024, but even going beyond that, how is the role might change? Will there be an automated system to come and do our job at some point, or how do we see that?
So, well, the low end of the job has been steadily been automated the last few years. So the low end stuff around demos, custom demos, low end PL evals, RFIs, RFPs, but there are now tools that do automatically for the SE nation. So I think that's great because it allows us as SEs to focus more on the higher end stuff. What you're also seeing is that if your company is if you're not just a single product company, or you're more than, $250, $300 million in revenue, the actual percent of time you spend in a sales cycle that revolves the demo itself is steadily decreasing. It used to be there was the sort of Damocles hang over the SE when they did a demo, and it was either make or break on the demo. But that's no longer the case. I mean, you've got all the business value discovery up front, the technical discovery. You've got the fit, you've got the different architecture, how it works in, all the relationship building that SEs have to do. So again, as Chris says, it's not just a demo and a mouse. It's being able to do all the other things as well. And that's the human side of a sales engineer that's going to be incredibly difficult to automate out of existence. I'd be more scared if I was a sales rep than if I was a sales engineer right now.
Well, and if I may, I was actually going to, John, something you just said there, kind of spawned this idea, and that is, I think another part of, or another way in which our role is changing, we have a more critical role in working with our sales counterparts and being a strategic for them and helping them navigate their way through a deal, because we have insights that they're just not going to have, right? And we, rather than just being sort of the resource that is called upon, we need to be more proactive and say, you know what, I think these are the things that we need to do and help them understand to make this deal happen, right? We need to take more of a driver's seat there. Do you see that, John?
Oh, absolutely. And the best rep SE teams are ones that, they walk into a building together, but then they go to different meetings and they get together, they collaborate. And the really smart reps know that they'll let an SE run, and people will tell a sales engineer kind of things they would never ever tell the sales rep, even if you ask it nicely around timing and budget and competition and everything else. And that's the leverage and the value of a sales engineer, which I know we're going to get to later, really, really comes into play. So the really good teams absolutely do that, and it's kind of like married couple almost.
Absolutely.
Greg, so you're on mute, by the way.
Yeah, one other thing is that I feel like, oh, sorry, my dog is getting angry at me.
Actually, I'd like to hear what the dog has to say.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the dog show, really. But the one thing I would say is that a lot of sales automation is coming in, both from the pre-sales and the sales side, right?
Yeah.
These tools, I feel, really augment what the individuals can already do, right? Then they're not fully going to replace, unless you find out, whatever's left is still a very human job. There's a very human job on the other side in buying technology and buying things. So, and there's always competition. There's always going to be things to discuss and talk about where the value really is. But using those tools better and actually maybe a bit more blending of the roles, right? So salespeople who can demo more of the product and pre-sales people who can take things, more through some of the commercial steps. Both of those things are going to be important, and some companies might be able to make do with an individual who can do both. But still, it could be a specialist kind of business, right?
Yeah. Like in my area right now, I am doing both, and it's not necessarily fun. Like those who enjoy doing the technical part,
no,
don't generally enjoy going and asking for POs or beaten down on the price.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that'll, like, maybe the salesperson's role is going to be reduced, but I don't think there is a special skill that they need. Anybody else hearing feedback, or is it just me?
Yes, that's better.
Okay, yeah, that's so. Greg, a question for you though.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about how SEs and account managers can work together, and that's like, John, I'm not sure if this is taught in your course, but I haven't heard any training about SEs and account managers, how they can work together. Usually it's SE skills or technical skills. How do you prepare them to work together to become that team that John was talking about?
Well, it's quite interesting because a lot of training efforts are happening separately, right? You have courses directed at pre-sales people to help them understand demoing and doing things differently, maybe adding a bit of structure to how a proof of value might happen and all of that. And quite often the salespeople don't go to those trainings, right? So you do need to work together as a team, really, to share the knowledge that you're each getting about each of the roles. And then, each pair, right? You might work with 5 different sellers. Each of them, you might have a slightly different relationship to, and you might need to discuss how are you splitting up that work that you both can do.
Ramsey, if I may,
please.
Again, build on what Greg was just saying. So I had an interesting experience about a week ago. I was in to do a talk for a company. We had about 15 sales engineers in the room, maybe another 15 or 20 sort of on a Zoom meeting. And we actually had a couple of sales leaders in the room as well. And after the session, one of the sales leaders reached out to me afterwards and said, "Chris, I'd love to have you come back in and do a similar session for the sales team. And I'd like to, maybe configure it or alter it just a little bit, but I'd like them to better understand how they should be working with their sales engineers." And I thought that was really powerful. And I think there is an opportunity to not only educate sales engineers on how they should better work with their counterparts, but better educate the sales folks on how they can better collaborate.
Nice. Is there any course for product managers? Because I feel like...
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead, John.
I was going to jump in and say, over the last 20 years, like, one of the biggest pieces of feedback that we hear is, wow, it would be great if the salespeople could sit in on this SC training as well. Yeah. And at least with smaller companies, that does sometimes happen. We get raised in the same room, and you just see the light bulbs go off and things work well. In the larger company, it doesn't happen because most EPs of sales are married to a sales process, whatever it is. Customer centric, solution selling, value selling, whatever, usually are terrible for sales engineers. and that's the reason why my and Chris's business and Peter Cohan's great demo and everyone else exists, because no one explains sales processes in SE terminology. But if you can get the two, SEs and reps working together, same language, same strategy, I think that's the best of all worlds. And I'm seriously thinking about doing a class on that at the end of this year.
Nice.
Because we're just in such demand having people in.
Ramsey, may I make a shameless plug?
Sure. And then Greg wants to do, I think, comment on something John was saying.
I do offer a workshop. It's literally a sales SE collaboration workshop. And it's a 1 day. We spend a few hours talking through some concepts. And then it's the rest of the day talking through the issues, working, through cadence, et cetera. So there are options out there.
Awesome. All right. We'll get the name of that course towards the end of the show. Greg, you have a comment?
So I would just say that the technical buying process doesn't necessarily go at the same speed as the selling process does, right? So every customer could have a different time that they think they should be evaluating, that they think they should be checking out different options and all of that. So you've got to think that what the pre-sales is doing in a deal won't necessarily match exactly what the sales process says it should every single time. You need some way to measure where are we in this deal technically and where are we in this deal from a selling point of view.
Nice. All right.
That's really good, Greg.
Yeah. It's I want to make sure that I asked some of the LinkedIn questions that were asked of me. And this first question comes from a gentleman. His name is Greg Holmes. And the question is, and it was an amazing conversation on LinkedIn, so everybody should check it out. Do you want to ask the question, Greg, or should I read it off of my notes?
If you read it out, it might be slightly more accurate than my recollection.
All right. I'm not going to do it with an English accent. Just if you want, I can do it with an Arabic accent. The question I'll be asking myself,
accent, maybe.
What was that?
An Australian accent, maybe.
An Australian accent. I can no. I'm not even going to try that. So, how SEs can measure and show their individual value that they're adding to the sales process? He's interested in what you guys have to say about that, and Benny as well, because I feel Benny's been silent. I need his input. So we'll start with John.
Wow. So I love talking about the value of a sales engineer in general. And I like to look at it from the customer point of view. So I'm bringing data to back up what we already, I think, all emotionally know. So we've been running for a while. We have about 7,000 now. And we ask people from all different parts of Fortune 1000 companies, who provides the most value to you and your sales team and your people, and you're buying technical stuff, to shorten it. And by a factor of 2 to 1 or more, the SE is always categorized as being far more valuable than the rep they work with, general collateral they can find on the website, and even executives from the vendor. Middleman thinks SEs are twice as valuable as the rep. Executives almost twice as valuable, and individuals in IT like 2.5 to 3 times more valuable. I think that's the intrinsic value that we have as sales engineers, and it's a weapon that we don't use enough. For specific SEs, I love to run take it to the extreme. And whenever a VP of sales says, well, what value do I get out of my SE organization? I say, well, imagine they all chipped in a few dollars, euros, yen, whatever, and they bought a lottery ticket, and they all quit the next week. Right? What would that do to your pipeline? What would that do to your customer satisfaction? What would that do to you closing deals? And the VP of sales just sits down and, the smart one says, well, I bought a piece of that ticket as well. Pre-sales is the oil that drives the engine of sales. And, that's really looking at it, from a higher level, which is where I like to look at it, what the value of engineering is. Because, if SEs didn't exist, the pipeline would drop 20% of what it was. or the closed, not pipeline. Or, to me, that's the value of like an S, never mind individual.
But how would you say you'd quantify that? So obviously the idea of, all of a sudden the pre-sales team or the sales engineering team going off, to perhaps where you are right now would be amazing. But obviously for the team, might be detrimental. However, how does one quantify that to that VP of sales besides just the disruption that may occur?
Well, it's not disruption. I mean, the company is out of business. So it is an essential part. You get into trouble when you start looking at an individual basis. I mean, you can you can start attaching people to deals in Salesforce. What's the input they put in, the number of hours, everything else. And as soon as you start getting in time tracking and activity-based tracking like that, it actually, although you have the numbers, becomes a little fuzzier. And then you look at, do you measure an MB sales engineer differently than you measure a solution architect who's selling it to Telstra, British Telecom, GE or somebody like that. So it's really hard to normalize it, even if you kind of take the quota on the bottom line of everything. That's why I always try and take the value conversation up to something that's at an organizational level rather than trying to look at it individually. Reps have a quota, so you kind of measure the impact of a rep. Only 62% of reps ever make their number. So what does that say for the sales engineers that support it? So I think you just go down a rabbit hole when you start looking at the value of an individual SE.
It's funny because at least in some of the jobs that I've done, the SEs also have a quota, and if the sales guy doesn't have it, doesn't make it, obviously the SE didn't make it. But then again, whose fault is that at that point? Is the sales guy, the SE?
Both.
Yeah. It's never the SE's fault. Don't say that.
Oh, sure it is.
So, Greg, you're on mute.
Blame everything on the sales rep. Yeah.
I'm always on mute.
Yeah.
Just on the quota thing, though, I feel like you can't confuse just results with value, right? And whether people are doing the right things and whether they're, it's a bit like you're playing a poker game, right? You're making bets. You want people to make the right bets. And even if they ended up ahead, sometimes you might go to some of the people who end up ahead and they didn't actually do the right things at the right times. They were just lucky. And then you can have really good people who do all the right things and it didn't happen 1 year for them for whatever reason. So it's an incentive, right? It's the incentive, the carrot that makes them really excited to do their thing. I am going to have to take a break and take my dog outside or else she'll keep yapping at me. But
go ahead.
I'm interested in what Chris might say as well, right? In terms of what's the difference between, say, giving someone an incentive, but actually measuring things in a way that you can help them, be a better sales engineer in the future, and also be able to rank the different team effectively.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I did see the dialogue on LinkedIn as well, and I'll be honest, I struggled a little bit thinking about this one. I'm with John. I mean, certainly when I was in the field, it typically was measured based on quota achievement. As this dialogue or as this discussion has gone on, I found myself making some analogies. One of the analogies is that I think of, and I'm an American football fan, and we talk about sometimes we refer to quarterbacks and we say, well, he's not going to win you the game, but he could lose you the game. You know what I mean? And so I think in some organizations, regrettably, I think when a deal is won, there are times when maybe the sales engineers aren't maybe recognized as being one of the key elements or the key assets, and yet fingers are pointed very quickly at deals that are lost because, at least in the perception of the salesperson, the demo failed, or they didn't do their role right. In terms of measuring kind of the performance of sales engineers, one of the easiest measure is who's busy. I mean, every organization I've ever worked with, regardless of how many sales engineers they had, there's a handful of sales engineers that were busy all the time, and all the sales folks wanted. And then there were other sales engineers that were struggling to get called into deals and struggling to keep themselves busy. So I mean, that's a very basic and probably unfair measure on some level. But I think it's true. So I'll be honest, guys. I think this is a tough question. I don't know that I have a magic answer. I actually like what John said. You could go to virtually any organization I've worked with, go to the sales management of the sales team. The question is simple: could you close deals without your sales engineers? In most cases, the answer is no. But I do think it's hard to measure and quantify.
From where I was sitting as a sales engineer at my former company, I feel like the way I was measured was how many complaints or how many compliments my manager got about me. Right?
Wow. Yeah, that's a horrible measurement. I mean,
yeah, that's not good.
Well, that was the only way.
There's one piece of data I could share. It's so we also, shameless plug as well. We also run SC leadership classes, and I think we're the only kind of like company that does that. And we actually have a book coming out now. We have the Zero Manager's Handbook. And one of the exercises we run in one of the works is what's the impact of your business when your top performing sales engineer leaves? So imagine you're a sales engineer manager, you have whatever 8 SEs, and your number one gal leaves, right? What assume everyone else is busy, and we actually have a significant amount of data from a bunch of clients about the monetary impact of that SE leaving, and it's like horrendously large. And the idea is to scare the SE managers into more on developing their people and retention than it is trying to go out there and be a super SE, because it's a horrible impact on business. And we've got like 50, 60 separate pieces of data now, and it's not even a scatter chart. It's a very nice linear line. So we do have a little bit of data. So I think sometimes, again, it kind of goes back to my point of measuring something if you pay. So in this case, we're taking away your top performing SE and what happens in the next 12 months, and it's scary.
Yeah,
interesting.
Nice. All right, I want to get to some more questions from the LinkedIn and Twitter world. This question is asking how rewarding is a non-individual contributor role in the sales engineering world. So since Greg is still a non-individual contributor in the sales engineering world, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I would say the important thing is never stop being able to contribute yourself, right? You need to maintain respect of your team, plus also know how they're doing. You need to be able to do the individual work yourself as well. But what I mean by that is you're not trying to take away the things from the team that they should be doing all the time, but you need to be able to step in and contribute when the time comes. So you do keep yourself somewhat fresh, but if you're the person who loves doing the individual role, I would say the worst thing you can do is go out and become a manager, because you'll get the part of your job taken away from you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think what I love about it myself is that you do get to do a lot of coaching. You do get to talk to everyone. You do get to know about everything that's going on everywhere. And I think that's exciting, right? You do get to be part of the team on every deal. And, when that's happening, or on every team, right, how the different people are relating and adding value.
Nice. All right. Chris, do you want to take a shot at this, or do you agree or disagree?
I agree. I mean, to a certain degree, I think it's a question of how you're wired. If what really gets you excited and gets you excited about getting up every day is being the person on stage or the expert in the room that delivers that message, right? And that's where you derive the most personal satisfaction and value. then to Greg's point, maybe a leadership role is not right. But if you get satisfaction out of bringing your people up and seeing them succeed, I've got my kids, right? The most satisfying thing for me is to see my kids succeed, whether it's in school, on stage playing guitar, on the sports field. And if you have that same feeling as a manager or a leader, and you get satisfaction out of seeing people that you've groomed hitting the home runs, then I think that leadership role is ideal. Because, by the way, I had a chat with a gentleman earlier today. I think the role of sales engineer, manager, director is becoming one of the hardest, particularly because I think the natural, the inherent talents and abilities that we have to be good sales engineers are different muscles than it takes to be a good manager. So more so than salespeople, I think the salesperson muscle translates more easily into a manager muscle, but not so for sales engineers. So I think it's a harder jump to make personally.
But okay, would you want a sales person to manage your sales engineers though?
That's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
What I'm saying is I think the role of sales engineer manager is tougher than sales manager. That's my personal opinion. Of course, I'm very biased, right? But I think that's a bigger, because what do organizations do? The best salespeople typically are, promoted to manager and then director and VP. The best sales engineers tend to be promoted. And like I said, I think the skills that make a really good sales engineer don't necessarily translate into the most effective manager. So I think it's a tough job. I really do.
Interesting.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's one of the hardest. I think it's one of the hardest jobs there is in the organization. I take issue with Chris saying it's becoming one of the hardest jobs. As someone who was a VP and a director like 20 years ago, it was pretty damn hard back then too. But it's interesting. If you grab a bunch of sales engineers and kind of stick them in a room and ask them where they want to be in 3 years, only around a third of them I say, I want to be an SC manager, because they see the grief that their first line managers take. And as Chris and Greg kind of pointed out, what makes you a rock star individual contributor doesn't necessarily make a great SE manager, because you're not being paid to develop clones of yourself. We say, there's 3+ rules of SE management. One is to develop people. 2 is to run pre-sales as a business. And 3, then your customers. And layered over all that is manage yourself. And not once in there do you hear hit the number.
Yeah.
That's what most people. My job's to hit the number. Well, yeah, it is, but you hit the number by doing those other 3+1 things exceptionally well. And that's kind of the way to look at it. And the last thing I do is I'll put a plug in for another book, not by anybody here. If you want to be an SE manager, or you're struggling to be an SE manager, there's a book written by a guy called Marshall Goldsmith called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. Yeah. And it talks about how to let go of all the things that made you successful, because now you're going to have to pick up new skills, and your skills don't necessarily translate into the new thing. And I think that should be required reading for anyone who's made a first line manager. Awesome book, and it helped me many years ago. So
okay, nice.
Okay, cool. So I guess with all this, making sure that you have the right alignment in your role makes sense. And but let's say for somebody that wants to grow, not just from making sure that my job fits what I want to do, but even from a compensation perspective, what has the potential to be most rewarding between, say, you're killing it as an individual contributor? Does the potential to income-wise match up to perhaps if you became a manager, and then even if you were to become an AE? How does that all kind of work? And a lot of the people, myself included, don't know very much about compensation structures in the SE world. So do you mind maybe providing some insight for those of us that don't have that?
Starting with John.
Okay, it's always me. So a really good AE can certainly outperform, her manager. Right? So there's a question about that, and that's what you actually have to get used to as a manager. Is your individuals could actually make sure if you have a suitably leveraged compensation structure. That said, if you look at some of the larger companies, they have 5-6 layers of role within sales engineering, from an associate SE, who's someone who's new college graduate just coming in, all the way up to like a master principal or a distinguished engineer. And in ways, that's equivalent to being an SE director, a second line SE leader. So if you get that, someone who wants to someone who wants to focus on being a better SE, can climb up the ranks and become, not just a senior SE, then a master or a principal and so on. And the compensation climbs with that. So, you don't necessarily have to go outside of sales to make a ton of money. You can make a pretty good living, if you so choose, either on the management side or on the individual contributor side of things as well. Maybe not in the tiny companies. You get into somewhat larger companies, $1 billion plus, you absolutely have that capability to do it.
So anything to add there, say Greg or Chris? Start with Greg and then Chris.
Yeah, sure.
Greg could probably talk about his experiences in his company. So
yeah, I mean, I think it's always a journey, and you've got to think about what your role has given you that is unique so far to your experience. So much of being a great SE and the difference is bringing those experiences and still applying the same principles, right? You're listening to customers. You've got to understand what their pain is and help them understand where they can go. The best people aren't necessarily the smartest or the ones who have the most deep technical knowledge, but they are the most influential, right? You need to be able to keep thinking like your customer, and how can you help them apply your capabilities, your products, what your business is able to supply, and transfer that into value. So I would say, from my experience, the really top pre-sales people are always earning good money. They are getting rewards that are, the top team member every year, I would say, was almost always going to out earn their manager in both pre-sales, sales, or most parts of the organization. And the tiering, as John suggests, a larger organization will be able to keep some top end talent in, but also you could go and look at some really small organizations, and the first founding pre-sales people in those organizations is an absolutely important element of the success of those companies. Like if you were one of the first SEs in a startup, you will have awesome earning potential both in commission, but actually also in shares and other things that those organizations might be able to offer you. So being part of a founder kind of role in a new organization could be one of your ultimate aims if it's as an individual contributor.
Thanks. Chris, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, and I'll just add a slightly different, sort of spin or just addition, and that is a couple things. First of all, anybody from my vantage point, anybody in a software sales role, whether it's engineer, sales engineer, manager, account executive, if you're performing well, if you're executing and performing well, you're going to be highly compensated. Like we're all going to be highly compensated in this role, right? Number one. Number two, we're all fiscally motivated. Like at the end of the day, we're all driven financially. But my advice, frankly, to you, Benny, and anybody else who's, I'm 51, I'll be 52 in about a month and a half. So anybody who's, in the 30-ish range, and I've learned this lesson more times than I can count. My advice is don't put money as number one. Don't become a manager because you think it's going to make you more highly paid. Don't stay as a sales engineer. Don't just go as an AE, an account executive. By the way, I think account executives, they have the highest upside from my vantage point in most organizations, right? And if you are going to prioritize money, that's where I would recommend that you go. But I've experienced it, and I've seen a lot of people who prioritize money and found out really quickly that once they hit those financial goals, if they're not doing what they're really passionate about, they're not going to be happy. And if you're in software sales, pursue your passion, and you're going to succeed, and you'll be very well compensated accordingly. That's my advice.
Oh, that's really good advice. Resonates strongly. All three of you, what you had to say there resonates particularly strongly. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think that's the perfect note to close on.
Well, actually, one other question, if that's okay.
Sure.
So we did have a friend of mine reach out, and something that you all actually touched on at the very beginning of this is something that I think touches on this as well, which is this idea of owning the relationship and the trust that may exist between, say, an AE and an SE. And so when it comes to owning the relationship, I think there's no question among any of us, unless I'm wrong, there's always going to be the account manager or the account executive, as it's their neck on the line if, say, the business doesn't come through. However, in many organizations, and you guys mentioned it yourselves, where perhaps the AE and the SE for the same deal will take two different paths to connect to their counterparts on the other side. For organizations that aren't structured in that way right now, where the AE is perhaps on every single engagement, even if it is among, say, the SC and the technical person on the other side, how is it that one could maybe change the structure or change the culture even to start to maybe have SCs work with the technical people independent of the AE being there? And whoever wants to take that. Greg,
I'll jump in first. I feel like it is still about ownership of the relationship here, right? But I feel what you should be able to do, even if the AE is going to insist on being everywhere all the time, then I'll make suggestions to them about this is what we need to do, right? I feel like we need to go and talk to these people about this part of the opportunity and keep offering, right? You'll always have side conversations when you go and grab a coffee with someone, right? You'll have a chance to whiteboard something up, and you'll interact differently with the people in the room. And if you are both in the room all the time at the same time, it also gives you the chance to watch the room, right? One person, whoever's not speaking, should be watching the room and understanding, what is going on in this room, who's calling the shots, who's influencing the others the most, and really working on that together. So building up your relationship still of how do you work with this customer.
You mean salespeople should not be sending emails in the middle of a meeting when the SE is talking?
No. Never happens. Never happens.
All right. Well, so it is time to close. I know, Greg, you have some engagements that you need to get to, important ones.
Quite important, yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to do some closing thoughts. Maybe we'll start with you. So if you need to get out of here, I'll give you the chance to do that.
I just think this is a great celebration of your podcast, Ramsey. I'm really proud of you, getting to 100, and I'm looking forward to listening to the next 100. I think sales engineering's come a long way in the time that I've been watching the industry and trying to contribute myself. So I'm really impressed, and I'm really honored to be a part, with Chris and John here, right? Published authors in our field. I feel really honored that you've just invited me.
It is my pleasure. It's my honor for you to be here. Thank you, Greg, for the kind words. Maybe Chris, any final thoughts?
So first, I'll just echo Greg's comments about what you've accomplished. 100 is a huge deal. So congratulations. Honored to be a part of it. And there is one sort of closing thought that I had, and it sort of ties into the last question that Vinny asked about the relationship with your sales counterpart. You guys may recall in one of the last podcasts, I said that I sort of subscribe to sort of a sales philosophy, which is other-centered selling, and it's really about putting the customer first. And whenever we're dealing with our sales counterparts, whether it's trying to have a conversation around how can we, work more independently or something like that, just like we lead with value with our customers, and just like we need to lead with the why with our customers and why it's in their best interest, I say the same thing with our sales counterparts. if we have something to discuss, we need to consider, why is it in their best interest, right? Why is it in our best interest? What's the value to them and to us as an organization, right? To establish that foundation before we, try to suggest changes. So taking an other-centered approach with our sales counterparts is equally effective. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah. So they're kind of like our customers as well, partners and customers simultaneously. Nice. John, you get to close the show.
Wow, awesome. All right. Time for a beer. No.
Yeah.
So can I thank everybody else. Congratulations on reaching 100.
Thank you.
You two are the youngest Centenarians, the best looking centenarians I've seen for a long time. So it's an awesome achievement. And, who would have thought when I wrote the first book 20 years ago that now there would be all these amazing resources out there and people contributing to our community. And, I just met with a group in New York, meetup group, 450 members, the SEs of New York. That's just fabulous. Just keep going, guys and gals. I can't let that owning the relationship thing go, though, unchecked. The rep does not own the relationship in the account. The team owns the relationship in the account. And be the senior partner and the SE is the junior partner, but without each other, nothing happens. And I just think back to, when I was an individual contributor and I had one of these, control freak reps who wouldn't let me into the account and had to monitor everything I did. And I started setting up break calls at 7 a.m. in the morning with my account and people, and I just knew the rep wasn't going to be able to make it. And eventually, through somewhat passive aggressive techniques, I beat him, and eventually he just let me go into accounts. So there's always a way without making it direct and conquer. So don't give up. Divide and conquer. You don't always have to be in the same room. But with that said, the final word to your listeners is, hey, listen, go out there and cast a big shadow. Don't just be a rock star sales engineer, but make everyone else you work with, all the other sales engineers you work with, better SEs as well. Get back to product management, product marketing, help support, help your boss even do better, and cast a big shadow. And if you do that, our profession will continue to grow at twice the industry average of just about everything else out there. Right now, being an SE, it's a fantastic place to be, even if you are 100.
Well, we just found the title of the show. Cast a Big Shadow, show 100.
There you go.
Awesome.
There you go.
Awesome.
Thank you guys for your time. I appreciate it. This was fun.
Awesome.
Thanks, Ramsey.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Good to see you. Good to see y'all, guys.
Thanks, Ramsey. Thanks for everything you do.
Thanks, Danny.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Cheers.
All right, Benny. We just did show 100. We interviewed 3 people. We moderated it. Before we started, I told them that, don't worry, when I ask you a question, I'm going to say a name so you can answer. And the first question I asked, I forgot to say a name.
Hey, well, I would say that, when your brain is firing on full cylinders, some things are going to slip through the cracks. And, you killed it. You did 110% today, maybe 109% because that won a little bit. So it's entirely forgivable.
Is it mathematically possible to do 110%?
I think if you're, could I antagonize another country or a whole country? I was going to say, I think in Russia, you could get up to 140.
Really?
I don't know. I think there was some election thing where they have.
Oh, that way. Yeah. Well, it's like Lebanon and Syria. 99% election votes went to that one person who went opposed or unopposed, whatever. Anyways, this is not a political show. This was a very interesting sales engineering show because we had 3 SE leaders in different stages of their career, and we talked to them about it. And I tried to go through all the questions that they were on LinkedIn. I couldn't go through all of them. I am sorry. We got through a lot of them, though. But they were good questions, although I'm not allowed to say. Ever since we came out with that podcast, I can't say good question anymore because now I sound like a hypocrite.
Hey, in your defense, I would say you gotta keep it select because I still find myself saying good question. Shoot,
yeah.
I probably should.
The point was to reserve the term good question for actually good questions.
Right.
Not to say it ever. Anyways, they were good questions that you asked on the LinkedIn, and so we went through a lot of them, and I hope you guys enjoyed the show as much as I enjoyed hosting it with my co-host extraordinaire, who has a towel hanging behind him. Is that a towel hanging behind you? I just noticed.
No, it's a sweater.
You're lucky you were in a smaller picture earlier.
Yeah, I know.
All right. Anything you want to say before we go? Because it's been a long show. So.
Yeah, no, I to mirror what everybody else said, congratulations again on getting to 100 shows. I'm so happy to have been along for the ride for the last few, and yeah, what an amazing show this has been. I really hope everybody else enjoyed it again as much as I did. I'm sure as we both did. And yeah, I can't wait for another 100 after this.
Like, imagine being able to. So everybody should start a podcast on a topic that they like. Because
not everybody. Let's not dilute the field too much.
Not necessarily about sales engineering, but if there's a topic you like, you should start a podcast about it. Because I just sat with 3 leaders of industry. Me and Benny just sat with people that 2 years ago would never been reachable. The author of Mastering Technical Sales, the blogger at Sales Engineering Guy, and the author of The 6 Habits of Highly Effective Sales Engineers. We would never have reached them. So if you want to reach people, do a podcast. If you want to do a podcast, I will help you. Let me know. I'm happy to help. So there's that. All right. I just went on a tangent that had nothing to do with anything. This was show 100. It was an amazing show. Thank you, John, for spending your time with us. Thank you, Greg. And thank you, Chris, for spending 3 hours with us. Chris has been on the show for 3 hours. That's fun. All right, guys. Good night. This is Ramsey with Benny signing off.